Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Heart of Glory, which is episode 19 of season 1 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I got the hiccups, where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video I will cover Heart of Glory. So Heart of Glory is the episode where they find a freighter damaged and they save a few surviving members on that freighter who turn out to be Klingons. Worf, takes a liking to them. Of course, haven't seen any other Klingons in a while, and they bond a bit. However, it is discovered that they are renegade Klingons who have in fact attacked another Klingon ship because they want to defy the peace alliance between the Klingons and the Federation and want to live for battle, and the Klingons demand that they be surrendered to be executed, where Worf would rather they die in glorious combat. But when they escape from the brig, Worf is able to grant them their wish of dying in combat and killing them, and he honors them as they die. So this is a big one. I don't think it's a great episode. In fact, when I first saw this, I saw later season Klingon episodes first, particularly season 4. I talked about how I saw season 4 first before I saw any other season. So I already saw episodes like Reunion, and Mind's Eye, and stuff like that. So I was already familiar with the Klingons and the ethos of the Klingons and what the Klingons were about. But during this rewatch, I'm trying to put myself sort of in the mindset of what it would have been like to watch these episodes when they first aired. And I've gone through, I'm going through all of Star Trek in order. I went through the first 3 seasons of the original series, then the animated series, then the first 4 movies, which was all that was released by the time this episode came out, mind you. Star Trek 6: The Undiscovered Country didn't come out till several years later. So, in trying to put myself in that mindset, this episode is very different for those who saw it when it first came out, because it basically establishes the Klingons as we know them, as they will go on to be in the franchise, as they're well known. Anyone will say, what are the Klingons like? Well, they're warlike, they live for battle and honor and all that. And really, that was created in this episode. Now, granted, later episodes would explore this more and actually do a better job at it and sort of get into more of what the Klingon culture is like. The second season episode, A Matter of Honor, actually goes into more detail about this. But then when we get the Klingon arc with Sins of the Father, Redemption, and Reunion, or Reunion then Redemption, that really explores all facets of Klingon culture in a much more realistic and better way than this episode does. So, which is why when I first saw this episode, I wasn't very impressed with it. I was just like, because it's not as good at sort of world building with the Klingons or describing a dynamic culture with the Klingons as those episodes are. But again, putting myself in the mindset of this is the first time the Klingons were fully established like this. So I gotta think about what came out before this that establishes Klingons as sort of warlike and thirsting for battle. And the 2 main things is the original series episode, The Day of the Dove, and Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. Now, you could also say Errand of Mercy, but that more, I mean, there are definitely traits of the Klingons in that episode that carries on further. But I don't think it really gets into the culture as much as Day of the Dove or The Search for Spock does. Would you have to completely ignore all the Klingons' appearances in Season 2 of the original series because they act more like Ferengi than Klingons, and that was sort of course-corrected later on. I already said how I disagree with the sentiment that some people have that they swapped the Klingons and Romulans for TNG, that originally the Romulans were honor-like and the Klingons were deceptive, but I disagree with that entirely. I don't think that was the case. I just think Klingons were out of character in Season 2 of the original series, and so just disregard all that. My dear Captain Kirk, just disregard all of that. And focus more on so the Day of the Dove and The Search for Spock. So Day of the Dove, the Klingons are sort of seen as kind of honorable. They don't never say the word honor, but you get the sense that they are a bit warlike, but they have their own code, and they're not just evil mustache twirly villains like they were in Season 2. That they have a sustainable culture. And that, they even have propaganda that paints the Federation as the evil ones. So that was a dynamic episode, and it's probably the only one of the original series that really fits into what we know of as Klingons. Although, as I said, Errand of Mercy kind of does as well, but it doesn't character build as much as Day of the Dove. And then you have Search for Spock, which again they were kind of like just bad guys. They're just the villains going around trying, killing Kirk's son and trying to steal the Genesis device. But again, they have their own sort of ethos. They definitely, particularly with the scene where Krug's mate, for a better term, I don't know if they're married, but his mate gets the Genesis information, but since he's seen it, it means that he has to kill her because he can't let anyone live who has seen this vital information. And the way he says it is like, have you seen this? And she says, yes, I have. And he's like, unfortunate. And she just says, understood. And then he says something like, I love you, or success, my love, or your memory will be cherished, or something like that. And she just says, success, my love, and then accepts the fact that her lover's about to kill her, and he does, and so that gets into the kind of, even though they don't use the word honor, that gets into the sort of the mindset, the ethos of the Klingon culture and what it's like, and you do get to, even though Krug is being a bit of a moron and overreacting, you do get the sense that they are honorable and that they have a code. Now, Krug does kill his crewmate willy-nilly, but that's because the crewmate destroyed an entire ship worth of people. And now Krug isn't punishing him for being a murderer. Krug is punishing him for being callous and not honorable or not calculating with his killing. And because tactically he wanted them alive. Not because he's this great humanitarian or whatever, but because it made more tactical sense. And so killing brutally, irresponsibly is dishonorable, even though they don't use that term here in Star Trek 3. But it goes along with the ethos. However, all that being said, this episode here, Heart of Glory, is what really brings it all together and cements what Klingon culture is actually like. As I said, those two other the episode in the movie, and even Errand of Mercy a bit, do hint, and of course their brief appearance in the motion picture, but that's very brief. That was when we first got their makeup and their language. But anyway, so those things hinted at what the Klingon culture was like, but this episode really cements it. It really cements that, for example, the cry of the warrior and the way they talk to Worf. Now, that's another thing that actually hinted at Klingon culture, because up to this point, this is the 19th episode of Season 1, we have had various lines from Worf throughout Season 1 that sort of hint at Klingon culture as well. It's like, I'm a warrior, sir, I don't, and stuff like that. But those are just various lines here and there. As I said, it's really crystallized, or, really comes to effect in this episode, where they sort of bring it all together when you have the scenes with Chorus, or whatever his name, I think it's Chorus, and Krumel talking to Worf, and how they talk about how he feels the cry of the warrior. Particularly this scene, like at first they're kind of mocking him for, being docile. Does it fill you with peace? Because he lives with the Federation, one of, Federation starship, and is a Starfleet officer. And he's like, you mock me. And then later he's like, no, you say if you mock me, I don't. I salute you. And I believe him when he says that. And then he has a line about, do you hear, when you were raised on Gold by humans, you know not why you had this bloodthirst or desire to go out in the wilderness and kill beasts, and the humans didn't understand, they shunned you. And it's interesting about the scene, it's a really good scene, is that you could tell that Worf doesn't really argue with him. So you can tell that he actually can identify with what Chorus is saying, and that he's actually hitting on, probably guessing pretty correctly what it was like for Worf to grow up amongst humans, and talking about how he hears the cry for the warrior. And the whole episode is about Chorus and Krumel not really wanting to live in this sort of peacetime era, and wanting to go off and do battle. That's the Klingon way of saying it. So again, this really establishes that, because this had not been established. This had not been crystallized entirely. Like I said, it was kind of hinted at. Search for Spock, Dave the Dove, and the few random lines that Worf had throughout Season 1. But this is what really, really cements it, that this is Klingon culture. So this is the episode that created Klingons as we know it. And of course, as I said, later episodes will go on to explore it a lot better. Now, that being said, they had, as I said, this was before Star Trek VI came out, so they hadn't really decided, or didn't really have a clear picture of what the relationship between the Federation and Klingon Empire was. And I think this episode was retconned a teeny bit. Like, some people can justify it to try to fit it into later canon, but I think it was retconned a teeny bit, because I think this episode's implying that, in fact, I think it's a later episode where Wesley has a random line where he says, oh, this is before the Klingons joined the Federation. So, which is not true. And I don't know if this episode is implying that the Klingon Empire joined the Federation, but it's definitely, I think, implying a much closer alliance than there actually is, or where that turns out to be in later seasons, because you have that other Klingon ship show up where they have like the Federation symbol and the Klingon symbol, like, together, one on each side, like, and the way he talks too is like, oh, they're defying the peace between the Federation and the Klingon Empire. And as we'll find out in later episodes, that peace is not as firm as this episode would imply. So that I think was a bit retconned later on, and definitely the Klingon culture and everything is handled with a lot more complexity later on, which is again why I said I wasn't impressed with this episode when I first saw it, because I'd seen those later episodes first, which did a lot better job. So this felt kind of elementary in compared to those episodes, but in the context of only taking into consideration Star Trek that came out before this episode actually is very interesting and does a really good job of creating the Klingon culture. Now, that being said, this episode apparently was written in 2 days, and I think it shows, because you have this section at the first part of the episode with the Geordi vision, where the Geordi, Riker and Data go on an away team to the ship. And God, they went crazy with the smoke machines, did they? Prop department must have got their hands on a lot of smoke machines and being like, ooh, can we use them? Because there was a ridiculous amount of smoke. But anyway, you get like 10 minutes of them wandering through this ship, and it's really boring and tedious. And then you had the Geordi vision, which is something they never used again, which makes sense, where they hooked up a device to his visor so he could transmit what he was saying to the bridge. And then you had this thing with Picard asking questions. It's like, what's that? Is that Commander Riker? It looks nothing like him. And why is there ore around Data? And then Riker is like, sir, I hate to break this up, but we actually have a mission to do. And I agree with Riker, the whole thing with the Geordi vision and Picard, going on about, oh, wow, this is amazing, and they're even playing that music, da-da-da-da-da, like it's really something special, but shouldn't you do this Geordi vision on a mission that was a bit less dangerous and a bit less crucial? You think of, they barely got out of that ship alive, and Tasha, didn't have enough time to get a good lock on them because they couldn't get far away enough from the core, and they almost all died because of that. And maybe if they didn't waste all that fucking time with the Geordi vision, they wouldn't have almost died. They put their whole lives in danger. So I think it's actually, from a writer's perspective, it was probably just a way to fill up the run time of the episode. But from a in-the-universe perspective, it was really reckless for them to do that in such a dangerous mission. If they wanted to use the Geordi vision, which again, as I said, is something we've never seen again, because I don't think it's that good of an idea to begin with, but they should have done it on a mission that was about a bit less dangerous. So the first part of the episode does drag, and it's completely unnecessary. I think I watched a review where they said the cold open of the episode should have ended with them meeting the Klingons. Instead, we didn't meet the Klingons till the end of the first act, and so it was very poorly paced. And then the stuff with the Klingons told Worf, actually it wasn't the Ferengi that we destroyed, it was our own Klingon ship we fired upon because they're chasing us because we want to live lives as warriors. And Worf is really upset, and they're like, hey, can you show us around the ship? I want to see that battle bridge. And Worf is like, sure. I'll show you the room that would actually let you commandeer and steal the ship. So that was a bit silly. Speaking of Klingon, getting back to Klingon culture, though, I do have to mention the death yell, because that was something this episode invented, and that was definitely something most memorable from this episode. Now, it was referenced a couple times in the future, but it's mainly known for this episode. Like, they didn't show it too much, and then which is actually consistent with this episode, because in this episode, someone tells Picard that it was the first time outsiders ever saw that ritual in practice, so it would imply that that's something that they don't do in front of others, or that they don't do willy-nilly. It's Yeah, so it's because it wouldn't make sense, for example, if they're in a battlefield and a Klingon dies and they stop what they're doing to yell, and then they could get attacked and then they lose the battle because they're wasting time yelling and prying these guys open. So one would assume they would wait till the battle's over, and they would, in the privacy of their own ship, they would take all the dead bodies and yell over them then, although they wouldn't be able to do the prying of the eyes. I think that's just in the case where people do die in private, and when they're not in the middle of doing something like fighting a battle. So to get spoilers ahead, so if you're watching first season for the first time, you might want to skip ahead, but to get into some spoilers on when this yell was used. It was used in two very crucial moments, and both times by Worf. When Kalar died, he did although you could almost say that was a yell of agony, and he didn't try to pry her eyes open, but it was like the dual effect of being a Klingon yell and a cry of agony, which made it so powerful. And then the other time was, of course, when he killed Gowron, and that time he did, if I recall, pry his eyes open, and that was more of definitely a closer example of him honoring or doing the ritual as seen in this episode. Although Worf is the only one that do it, none of the other Klingons join in. What's wrong with him? Those dishonorable bastards. Anyway, so those are the two major times. Maybe there was another time that I'm not thinking of, but I think that was it. And I do like its execution and the concept of it, particularly in this episode. I thought it was quite powerful. So yeah, there's a few things like that were interesting. Again, establishing Klingon culture, like when there was a standoff between Yar and, goddamn, did she bring enough security people? She had like 8 or 10 of them with her, but I guess they're Klingons, so it makes sense. And this little girl ran out of turbolift and ran into Quark's arms. He held her up, and she jumped to conclusions. She's using that jump to conclusions, Matt. She jumped straight to conclusions. Like, oh my god, we got a hostage situation. And he looks at her, like, whatever, and just hands the little girl to Worf. And then Worf explains later, it's like, Klingons do not take hostages. Cowards take hostages. Now, I was trying to think of an example in Star Trek where Klingons took hostages, because I was like, I wonder if there were, but I can't think of any. Maybe there was in Friday's Child. Did that Ferengi-looking Klingon, Ferengi-acting Klingon guy take a hostage at one point? I don't think so, but yeah, anyway, disregard season 2 of the original series for Klingons, as I said, so that wouldn't count. But I couldn't think of any other time Klingons took hostages. So you win this round, Worf. Anyway, and then I gotta mention this meme I saw that was so hilarious, where it was from this episode where those, the Klingons make this makeshift disruptor, and they use this other thing to take the force field down, and then the one security guard is standing outside, poised and ready, where the Klingons are in there aiming their disruptor. And there was this meme I thought it was the funniest thing ever that showed the picture from that of the security guard standing outside while the Klingons were getting ready to kill him, and it says, "You got this, Gary. Today's your day." And of course that guy dies. But to be fair, other security guards show up and kill Krummel, which I did, Krummel or whatever his name is, and I did like that. I did like it how the security wasn't completely ineffective and shitty, that they at least managed to get one of the Klingons. But yeah, that meme is funny. And yeah, it was fairly decent episode. So I want to thank all of those who support me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It helps me to continue, keeps me going with this channel, and it's just very much appreciated. So quick shout out to all those who support me on Patreon. We have Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Miguelcio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal Howes. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. And we also have a few patron comments for this episode. If I can just find it. Here we are. First comment is from Norman Buckwald, who says, the challenge with this episode is where the series goes with Worf and what's defining of Klingon culture in future episodes makes this one seem ho-hum. Meanwhile, I suspect the first viewing of this episode may have been different. Unfortunately, I saw this episode after the two-part redemption, so by then this episode seemed, boring. Also, there was the waste of time of trying to see a ship as Geordi sees it, of which I guess it was the effects of that time that made it disappointing. Given that, I guess I'd call it average, and then how ho-hum it is compared to Klingon episodes to come. One of the lesser Klingon episodes. Still, I'll try to go as if this was fresh and new, as it was at the time, and give it a 5 Death to Glorious Stavrocore yells out of 10. Yeah, the Geordi vision was just a bloody waste of time. It doesn't really matter how good or bad the effects were. It was just dumb for them to waste time to do it anyway. Just my humble. Anyway, next comment is from Brandon Neal Howes that says, far too much time is spent on Geordi vision. Interesting to get some backstory for Worf. I think they were still working out Worf's history. The rescued Klingons all look like they've escaped from the 1980s TOS movies. The security on the Enterprise is appalling. Worf takes the admittedly renegade Klingons on a tour of engineering, so it's no surprise when two Klingons try to take over the ship. I nearly laughed out loud as Chorus and Krummel in the brig making phasers out of stuff hidden inside their uniforms, because it occurred to me that Klingons would be the perfect suicide warriors. As Brian Wilson saying, I just wasn't made for these times. I'm sorry, I don't know the tune, so I couldn't sing it in tune. Anyway, so the death of these Klingons were inevitable. Was I the only viewer who got Tellarians mixed up with Tyrellians? I wish this was a better episode. I really wanted to like it, but there's not enough to go with. 3 fugitives from Kling out of 10. Yes, they called the home planet Kling, which this was before it was established as Kronos. Now, I'm trying to remember when it was, because I thought maybe it was Star Trek 6, but then I thought, actually, maybe it was Sins of the Father, because they went to the Klingon homeworld there, and maybe that's when they established it as Kronos. But either way, it hadn't been established as Kronos at this stage. And calling it Kling when they're Klingons does make logical sense, but it doesn't sound very good, does it? Having a planet called Kling. Anyway, the security was lax in terms of letting them have all that stuff that could let them build weapons in the brig without, scanning them for weapons, or at least confiscating all their shit before putting it in the brig. So yeah, in that case, the security was lax. But otherwise, I actually thought the security was actually decent. As I said, like, the security guards actually took out one of the Klingons before the other one made it to engineering. But yeah, Worf was kind of ridiculous for, let me show you all the key places of the ship that would let you take over, even though you just told me you were renegades. So that wasn't very smart. So anyway, Worf's history is also an interesting topic, because this episode established he was from Gold, and established that his parents were killed in a attack when he was very young, and a Starfleet officer came. And also, I believe, this is the first episode to establish that he is the only Klingon in Starfleet, which is something I don't think they knew before this episode. And in fact, I think it was hinted that there were more Klingons in Starfleet, and so this is what really establishes that. But, later on they contradict this by having references to Worf being raised on Earth, where this episode they made it clear that he was raised on Gold up until he was in his college years. Because he referenced, like, going to college or whatever and still being on Gold. Later, I think later episodes of TNG try to imply that, they moved from Gold to Earth at some stage. And then he even references growing up in Minsk in Russia, which contradicts what this episode sets up. But whatever, I'm not going to cry foul, canon breaking, or whatever. It's just a bit of inconsistency. But it also establishes that he had a foster brother. And this is why, like, I've heard some other people say in season 7, just this foster brother just appears out of nowhere, which I, no, because when I first saw this episode, I was like, I want to see this foster brother. And for years after, I'm like, where's Worf's foster brother? I want to see him. And so when they showed him, I'm like, yes, finally we get to see his foster brother. Now, granted, I'm being a bit of a nerd because I'm picking up on this one line from this Oscar episode that many people didn't register, completely forgot about. So it would appear that, he has a foster brother? Huh. Whereas I was like, yes, his foster brother, we finally get to see him. But anyway, my rating for Heart of Glory out of 10 is going to be a 6. Good. Almost gave this episode a 7, because it's definitely better than a lot of season 1 episodes, but it doesn't hold up when you compare it to later Klingon episodes. Even the season 2 episode of Matter of Honor does a better job of exploring Klingon culture, but you do have to give this one credit for being the first one. Now, it's a very uneven episode. As I said, the Geordi Vision thing was a complete and utter waste of time. This episode definitely could have been edited or paced better in the script, but it was still interesting enough. These Klingon characters were interesting, and it was interesting tackling Worf sort of addressing the fact that he was an outsider who was raised in a culture different than his, but still honored his own culture and wanted to stay true to that, but at the same time not wanting to betray his shipmates, and ultimately deciding to side with them. That was pretty good. So it was a decent episode, but yeah, it was lacking a lot, so I will give it a 6 out of 10. So that is it for my review of Heart of Glory. So coming up next on my channel, this Wednesday will be my review for the next episode of Ahsoka. Thursday, my review for the next episode of Lower Decks. And then Saturday, we'll be back for another TNG review, this time with the episode The Arsenal of Freedom. And then Monday, I'll return with another TNG review with Symbiosis. So be sure to check out my channel for that, and as I cover many other Star Trek videos and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.